process was stalled because you need to sell off some of these assets that are a perennial drain on the taxpayer. I would say that the last thing to seal the deficit is transparency. We need and accountability. And in fact, there are very good policy statements. Like I said, the Treasury is always on the mark with the sweet narrative. But the implementation is a problem. You have to reduce the graft. You have to reduce the waste. When you're talking about Eurobond borrowing and the large amounts that can't be traced. When you're talking about maybe 30% of the budget, can be traced. We shouldn't normalize that. We really have to just say enough is enough. Very final point. Our debt management process is broken. It needs to be overhauled. There had been a proposal to have an independent debt management
office
body.
Yes, that's correct.
That is independent. And I think the evidence of the last 10 years demonstrates to us this is an imperative. It actually can't wait. It's something we must do. Tying up the Treasury with debt management has been disastrous.
Actually, the legislation around that debt body, I think, has been stuck in Parliament since 2020. And so that is a discussion Kenyans will continue to have, especially if we breach that 9 trillion ceiling. Mokua, I think now you're good. Let me allow you to jump in.
Thank you so much, Waigwa. And let me go straight and give you a proposal, which in my view, just one, can be able to unlock about 200 billion.
Out of, can it also be a personal proposal for myself? But we can talk about that after.
We get 800, we are at 850 deficit, and then you can be able to raise 200 billion, and then you'll have reduced by 6. And let me give you this scenario. Our current debt structure is that the external debt, out of the total debt stock, is 52%. While the domestic is 48%. Now, and this is according to the reports of the Controller of Budget and any National Treasury reports. On the flip side, on debt service, that's the interest. External debt accounts for only 26% of the total interest that we pay, while domestic accounts for 74%. And in total, as at 30th June 2021, the total interest debt service that we had paid, it's about over 500 billion. If I'm not sure, it's about 403 or thereabouts. And the external actually is 156 or thereabout, while the domestic is about almost 400 or thereabout. I'll give you you can get the exact figures. If we have the right debt mix, if we move away from domestic debt is very expensive. Actually, for that period, the weighted average interest rate for that period is 11% on domestic, while the weighted average interest rate for external has moved away from 9 to about 6.9%. So you can see if we restructure our debts as it currently is, we'll be able to save, and we go more into external, which is concessionally and non-commercial, we'll be able to save about 200 billion.
The right debt mix will save us 200 billion.
The right debt mix. And the PFM Act, by the way, Section 49 says, we may raise loans from Kenya or from outside. And we'll be proposing amendments to those provisions to the extent that let's also propose a desirable debt mix. Because we are crowding out the local borrowing and so on and so forth, and we are borrowing very expensive. Domestic debt is the most expensive currently, and I've shown you the figures, how much we're paying in terms of interest. And if we have the right and optimal debt mix, we'll be able to unlock about 200 billion.
I think it's a very interesting journey you've taken us along. Go ahead, briefly, so that he can jump in.
I'm not an expert in this area, but there is a need to discuss the debt mix, because the external debt, on the other hand, is in hard currency. And what happens is it then has forced monetary policy that pegs the exchange rate to stabilize the economy, because we are very exposed, because we are making heavy repayments in terms of hard currency. So there is also a risk to the external debt. We are also a lower middle income country, which means our access to concessional funding has reduced, even though now we are seeing the European countries, the World Bank's coming up with more facilities for countries such as Kenya.
IMF,
now, yes, now Kenya has gone for the most expensive type of commercial debt, which is the least accountable. So there's an accountability issue there. But the point I'm making is we need a discussion about the optimal debt mix, but we also need a restructuring of the domestic debt market, because domestic debt should not be that expensive. That is not sustainable for the country. And, some of the arguments are that there is also a lack of transparency in the domestic debt market. And this has shown to us that for us to be able to, sustain our development, we need to deal with that. The last thing is AfroDad, as one of the regional advocacy institutions, is talking about African countries coming together and trying to put together a Dove fund, which is channeling the external resources and framing them in a way that Africa is able to borrow on more beneficial terms to itself. Mm-hmm. And they call it Africa the rule maker, as opposed to now where we are forced to go into the external market at terms that are not beneficial to ourselves. So I think it's an important conversation to have experts such as these with experts who hold the other view and find a mix that is to the advantage of Kenyans.